Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Peterson, and it looks like Lamise is jumping on as we speak. There she is.
Erin,
Hello.
sorry for the delay. We just closed
okay.
the previous session, so you guys.
And it was great. I was on as long as I could be.
Fantastic. So let's give people probably a couple of minutes as they make their way over to this session.
Okay, great. Here, I thought we were live. I was jumping in with my intro.
Yeah, let's just give them it was a nice segue, actually, because there was a conversation around recruiting being people, process, technology. We talked about people and technology in the previous one, and I think we'll hear more about the process and the methodology in this discussion.
Perfect. That's perfect. When I jumped off, it was the focus was still DE&I and integrating DE&I into marketing, recruitment marketing. Yeah. So
we
good stuff.
Covered the vaccination requirements, policy, and technology, and was good conversations. So welcome, everyone. Good to see you. And thank you for sticking around 4 hours. I know it's a lot to ask when everyone is busy hiring people, as we all know, and with all the activity that's happening. So we appreciate you sticking around. And with that, I will hand it over to my friend Erin to kick it off and start the fireside chat.
All right. Well, thank you, Lamise. It's always a pleasure to be part of RPOA Con. And I am Erin Peterson, as Lamise said. I am a consultant in talent acquisition. I lead the talent acquisition consulting practice for PeopleResults, which is a consulting firm made up of mostly former Accenture consultants. And we help our clients with change management, communications, and talent acquisition. And I am here today with Trent Cotton, and I'm excited for our discussion because we are going to talk all about sprint recruiting. And with that, I will turn it over to Trent to give a quick introduction of himself.
Hi, thank you, Erin. I am Trent Cotton with Bureau Veritas. I've been with the firm since January. Prior to that, I've spent about 10 and a half years at an international bank. And decided, it was kind of time to make a change, and why not make a change in the middle of a pandemic and, this wonderful trifecta of an economic doom that we have to make TA so incredibly interesting. But I am responsible for acquisition, analytics, and retention and employer branding for all of North America. So Canada and the US, primarily, some in the Caribbean as well.
Okay, terrific. And I think one of the more unique parts of your role is that you're responsible for retention as well. So if we have a minute, I'd love to dive into that because I'm hearing that more and more in talent acquisition leaders. And where I draw my primary experience from is Accenture, Aon Hewitt, actually Hewitt first and then Aon Hewitt, where I led the RPO business, and then Amazon. And I've seen a lot of change in that 30 plus years in recruiting and recruiting leadership. And process efficiency and effectiveness has never been more important, primarily because my personal opinion is the Amazon effect, not the Amazon from an employer perspective, but the retail experience. So we've all come to expect a better experience in really every way because we have been so delighted by the way that Amazon, sets our expectations low and exceeds them every time, at least in my experience. So I want to talk about that, and especially some of the ways, Trent, that you have found to completely upend your processes that you lead and just take a whole different approach to it. But first, I want to talk about your pivot because you actually had a pivot in your career. You talked about starting in banking, actually as a banker and a lender. And that was Colonial Bank, Wells Fargo, Regions Bank. Am I right about that?
You're right.
Okay. And then you went over to SunGard and then SourcePoint. So you had a little outsourcing experience, but that was kind of when you switched over to HR / recruiting, right? So what can you just tell the viewers what was the catalyst there? What made that happen?
Oh, yeah. So whenever I talk to people that I knew from early in my career, and I tell them, yeah, I've spent the last 17 years in HR, they're a little surprised because I hated HR with a passion. They were useless to me. A lot of times I was running sales divisions. Before I made my pivot, I was running 4 states for a mortgage company. And, I've shared with you, my grandmother always had a saying, if you don't like something, go and break it and fix it the way that you want it. And I saw this position out there posted for a contract recruiter for Regions Bank. And I said, what the heck? And went on the interview and was surprised whenever they gave me, it was a contract role. I didn't even know what a contractor was at the time. So I was like, hey, give it a shot. And got in there and was trained by 2 out of the 3 were just absolutely intolerable. I think their life's ambition was to convince me that I was not ever going to be a successful recruiter because I didn't know HR.
Because you weren't one of them.
Wasn't one of them. Yeah,
Okay.
I wasn't part of the
All
Mean Girls. That scene from the movie Mean Girls, you can't sit with us. That was like every day that I came into work. And eventually, though, I call it finding my voice. I kind of found my voice because I realized that I had something that they didn't have. I could talk to the client in the words and the language that the client understood, and then I could develop my recruiting plan from there.
Okay, so let's talk about that. But actually, first I want to back up and talk about Mr. Joe. Because when you were learning the banking industry, you got some pretty tough feedback, and
yes.
Something you still remember. Tell our viewers.
Oh gosh, Mr. Joe was or JP. He had so many nicknames. He had retired 3 different times from 3 different banks. He just loved to work, and he was a calling officer. And I don't even think I was 21 at the time. Whenever they paired me to work with him as a kind of business banker, private banker, calling officer. And I would go out on calls with him, and the man was just unreal. I mean, he'd flip the back of a piece of paper over or a napkin or anything and like write stuff out, kind of doing a loan proposal, and was very consultative with the clients. And I wanted to show him that I was listening and that I was learning. And I found this prospect that was a startup. And so I scheduled the call. And I said, Mr. Butler, I got my first call. I want you to come on. I'm going to lead it. And I want you to debrief and tell me what I did right and what I did wrong when we got in the car. So get in there, speak to the client or the prospect for about an hour, get in the car. And I remember he drove this Cadillac, and it had to be over the summer because I remember I was sticking to the leather. He had just turned the car on. And I said, Mr. Butler, how did I do? And he just had this face about him that whenever he turned around and he looked at me, he said, I know at least an hour's worth of reasoning why they shouldn't bank with who they're currently banking with, but not one good reason why they should bank with you. And so, I mean, I came out of it thinking I was a rock star, and everything that he taught me, as I kind of look back over my life, he sewed so much into me because he was always focused on the client. Every time that we were in a meeting, if they wanted to restructure a loan or restructure a process, he goes, no. What's this going to do to our clients? And this was 20 something years ago, before client experience and all these little buzzwords. That was just at the core of his success. And luckily, he invested that in me. And that has always been, I guess, my focus is looking at how can we make this better for our candidates, for our hiring managers, for our HR partners, and how can we elevate it? Hey, we've done great, but I'm not done. How do we continue to iterate?
Yeah, and those early experiences are so critical, because we're young and we're teachable, and especially if there's emotion involved, which it sounds like there was in that situation, we become all ears. So, and no doubt you leveraged that sort of emotional learning and business learning later on. We're going to talk in a minute about this book that you wrote called Sprint Recruiting. But before that, just talk about the chicken lender. You have a story called the chicken lender.
So the 2 Hellions that were training me, they kind of got mad because I was finding ways to find candidates. And I remember one time I blocked off my calendar one morning, and I was working on, I think, a mortgage position or something, and I had the local manager send me the phone book. I mean, this was how far back it was, the phone book and the Chamber of Commerce and I gave them like 5 different things. I said, inner office it to me, and I just made me a list and I just started calling. And I remember one of them was standing outside my cubicle, And she goes, I need to talk to you about, a job I want you to work. I said, okay. I said, well, let me make this one last call and then I'll come in there. And she goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm cold calling. She goes, what is that? I said, well, I'm calling mortgage lenders to see if I can talk to them and get them interested. She goes, what do you do if they hang up on you? I said, I call back later. And she goes, that's so embarrassing. I was like, chick, I've had people slam doors in my face, like hanging up, that's nothing. So anyway, she gets me to work on this job, and the hiring manager was Fred out of Jackson, Mississippi. And I had done a lot of lending, commercial, private, wealth banking, all kinds of different stuff, church lending. Never had I ever heard of a poultry lender. And we go on the call, and I think the job had been open 8 or 9 months, and Fred was just not happy, not pleased, and especially that he was getting someone that was maybe 90 days into being a recruiter. And so after he spent about 20 minutes berating the recruiter, he goes, all right, newbie, what do I need to teach you about the role? And so I just started asking him very practical questions. I said, okay, so I'm assuming that, this has got some type of LTV or loan to value. And he goes, yeah. I said, so what's the standard? Is it 75 or 80% depending on, the value of the asset? He goes, 75. And I asked a couple of, just because I was curious, and I could tell that I was kind of getting him because the wall started coming down and he was getting more engaged. And I was also noticing that I was ostracizing the recruiter that was leading the call because she had no clue what we were talking about. It was like a foreign language. So toward the end of the call, I said, all right, I think I have everything that I need. I have one burning question. So you do 75% loan to value, right? He goes, yes. I said, okay. Is that from the neck down or the ankles up? And he just starts laughing. And I said, Fred, I know that you're using that kind of like an accounts receivable. I said, I just had to ask. And from that point on, I realized, hey, I found something. It's the client.
Something.
I connect with the client. They can teach me whatever I need to about that job. And then I can start, applying all these different processes and stuff. So that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And then, fast forward 17 years, 17 years later, I get into a totally new industry at a very difficult time. And I take that same approach of going, okay, you need an inspector. What do they inspect? Oil and gas. What just those that I call it intellectual curiosity. It's something I always look for in a recruiter, that I always want to kind of pick into it. And I've never lost that. I got that from Mr. Joe, and I've just let it evolve and get better with time.
I love it. And it's all part of that bringing our whole selves to work, honestly, not only from a, diversity of experiences perspective, but work experiences.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for heaven's sakes, we need to be business people first and recruiters second, I think. So all that sort of culminated at some point, and 10 plus years at BBVA, using your banking and lending experience and progressive positions in talent acquisition. And now you're at Bureau Veritas, but something was rolling around in your head about applying the concept of agile methodology to recruiting. Now, you're not the first one to come up with this. There's a bunch of folks out there who have kind of done that in bits and bytes. But you wrote the book, Sprint Recruiting, and applied the concept to this kind of sprint concept. So walk the listeners through the tenets, the kind of the headlines around what is sprint recruiting.
All right. So I went kicking and screaming into training for Kanban, design thinking, and Agile. I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks worth of training over 3 months. And I came out of it and then listened to the book by Jeff Sutherland called Scrum. So Agile is the methodology, Scrum is kind of the execution side of it. And I just could not shake this thought of going, okay, if this works for Apple, if this works for Facebook and product development and developing key solutions to get to the market based off of what the client wants, there's got to be something in recruiting. There's got to be a correlation there. So I started tinkering around with it. And God bless the team I was leading at the time. I drugged them through so many different beta tests of it and to get to where we finally have it now. But I realized, just in analyzing, there's 4 pitfalls to how recruiting is done today. The first one is that everything is a priority, which all of us know means nothing is a priority.
Bingo.
Yeah, at the time I was supporting our tech divisions, and our CIO drove me absolutely crazy because every 48 hours or 24 hours or sometimes 16, this is a priority position. No, this one's a priority position. So of course, being client-centric, I'm trying to align my resources, and all we're doing is the Chicken Little effect of, the sky's falling. So that's the first pitfall. The next one is that we're just so process oriented. We never stop and go, okay, what's working and what's not. There's no bookends or drumbeat to it. The other is that a lot of times I've found that like the recruiters, we thought we were doing a good job because we're filling a lot of roles. But then whenever I talk to the clients, you know, they didn't think we were successful, and it was because we weren't filling the right roles. But how do we know what the right roles are? So there was a huge misalignment there. And then two, the feedback loop was broken, if existent. I love whenever I'm talking to people who read the book and they go, "Oh yeah, we've got an SLA with our client on feedback." I'm like, "Okay, cool. So what does the client have to do? What do you mean? When do they have to give you feedback?" Well, they don't. Okay, that's not an SLA. That's a contract, you know. So looking at those four, the team and I, we developed the 4 principles of sprint recruiting. So the first one is the sprint itself. You look at what can be accomplished in 2 weeks, and especially this is huge for those who work. You know, I guess people like me that would employ an RPO, but then also RPO supporting clients. Is you've got hundreds of requisitions. It's incredibly daunting, you know, to try and think, how are we going to get all of this accomplished? The first thing of taking that huge piece of pie is breaking it into a sprint in 2 weeks, and you know, telling the client, what do I need to accomplish? Define success for me in 2 weeks. What is the most important? And then the flip side of it, as a client, to help your RPO work better, is to give them that, you know, over the next 2 weeks, these 25 positions are mission critical. We've got to get these filled. And that already kind of takes that huge job and breaks it into at least a little bit of a bite-sized piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the next part is letting the business drive priority. So you've gone from hundreds of jobs to maybe your top 60 in 2 weeks. Of that 60, what we do is we give the client points and say, all right, out of these 60 jobs, you have, let's just say 200 points. I want you to assign a value and rank them and tell me which ones are most important out of this list that you've already created. So I'm shrinking it down even more. More importantly, what I'm doing is I'm getting them to commit to a definition of success. All right. So once I have my 2 weeks, I have my time frame, I know what needs to be done in those 2 weeks. I need to put some type of a drumbeat in there to make sure that the recruiters have a process to where we stop. Because what happens a lot of times is we work on a position, we send candidates over, the manager says, "Hey, I've just interviewed 10, give me 10 more."
Mm-hmm.
And what happens? They go back and hire one of the first 5 that you sent, you know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then they're surprised. They don't, you know, they're no longer interested. And that also creates a lot of inefficiencies, and we want that drumbeat. So what we do is we put in work in progress limits, or WIP limits is what they're called. So think of the 3 swim lanes in recruiting. You have the hiring manager interview, you have the hiring manager submitted, and then of course what the recruiter is doing. So let's say first 2 weeks, the engineer position is at 60 points. That is your absolute most important one to get worked on. Your goal is to hit your WIP limit, so maximum number of candidates to be interviewed by the manager, and then you stop. So none of this going back and forth or whatever. You work on your 60, you hit your WIP, you stop, you work on the next one, 25. Mm-hmm. And all of that is contingent on getting feedback from the manager, which is the 4th principle. And it just works like a well-oiled machine. Of course, it's not the end all be all. There are still things that
stuff happens.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Stuff happens. You know,
Yeah.
hiring managers still want to complain. They don't want to give feedback. They get ticked off whenever they don't want to give you feedback on the
Mm-hmm.
5, and you're not going to give them more candidates. So it can be a little combative. But the thing that I love about it, Erin, is that, and I'll warn people whenever I train them, managers and recruiters alike, no one can hide. Recruiters, if you're going after these non-sprint roles because they have a lot of applicants, I'm going to know, because my client said that this is success and you're not meeting it. Hiring managers, if you're not giving us feedback and you're the obstacle in the process, I'm going to know. And guess what? In our bi-weekly sprint meeting, we're going to talk about all of it, good, bad, and ugly. And
accountability is
the
key,
transparency
isn't it?
too. Yeah.
Okay.
And it just works, you know.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go over again. Business defines the priority.
Mm-hmm.
Work in progress limits drive focus.
Mm-hmm.
Sprint drives efficiency, and then feedback drives progress. Is that right?
That is
The
it.
big four.
Look at you.
I bought the book.
I
I
know,
bought
you're
the book.
great. I know, I love
I'm a knowledgeable interviewer here.
I
It's an
love
excellent
it.
book, by the way. And so I'm thinking about this from the perspective of RPO, having led an RPO, having sat together with the buyer of our services, having talked to them about the, frankly, limits of the capability, in some cases, of the team that is fragmented and doesn't know what the priorities are, and looking for their help in identifying that. I mean, you referred to it earlier, there's sometimes pushback. So what's your best, I'm thinking of all of our RPO friends who are listening here. What's your best advice to an RPO provider who is sitting with a client and wants to get their mind around this kind of a concept that would help them help their clients? But it's about setting boundaries, and boundaries sometimes are really uncomfortable from a client perspective. So what do you think?
Definitely. There are two things that I am incredibly protective of outside of my daughter. It is my time and my focus. So those are both limited, believe it or not. Those are very limited resources. And two, I think, especially now, I think one angle that I would take if I was an RPO is say, look, we have limited resources, we have limited time. We want to do the very best for you by increasing capacity and increasing efficiency. And the only way that we're going to do that is to provide some limitation and getting you to define success over these next 2 weeks. So let's get into that. To me, that's easy because as a client, I can relate to that. I have limited resources, which is why I'm coming to you, my RPO partner, to kind of help me. So you're kind of establishing that baseline and saying, okay, you both agree, or both of us agree, that we have limited time and resources. So we're going to have to find some way to make this work. And then the other part of it is using some of the analytics that, over time, it's usually about the third or fourth sprint, you begin to see that capacity increase on day 8, and then it goes to day 7. And then it continues to kind of decline to where the client starts to feel like, okay, wow, this RPO, by working within limitations, is actually producing more. It's so incredibly counterintuitive.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually is kind of the other thing I wanted to dive into is better results. How quickly have you seen that? Really, in the first 2 weeks of this kind of a concept, or does it take?
God, no.
Or does it take months? For them to really kind of see the real results.
No, the first 2 weeks is me just kind of recording myself the 4 principles, and just putting it on the call, because it's a mind bender. It's a mind bender for the client because they're used to getting everything that they want right whenever they want it, and it's a mind bend for the recruiter who is and coming from someone who is very client centric, of going, I've got 60 positions, maybe I need to go. No, I need to go to what my client said is important, and that's what I'm going to work on first. So it's a mind shift. Some recruiters get it in about the second or third sprint. Other ones, it's like 6 months later. I'm going, okay, we need to make the bend. Usually for me, I find that the more progressive organizations pick it up on the third sprint. It's like the recruiters get their mojo, the managers get their mojo, they start using the same language. And it's usually by the third or fourth sprint that I stop hearing this term time to fill, which is just grates my nerves. We're now talking more about sprint. Where are we on the sprint? You hit 68%, you hit 50%. And the analytics that we have, we can look at any point and see how many points are sitting in each one of those different steps. And as a leader, I can start digging into, what's the obstacle? Is it a candidate? Is it a market? Is it compensation? Is it the client? And I provide the air cover, or the managers provide that air cover, and we spend more time blowing obstacles out of the way versus playing the whole daycare referee thing, which is what I felt like, before we started implementing sprint recruiting.
Okay. Have you found that there are recruiters who have joined your team thinking this is really going to be great, and then they're just, I mean, let's face it, a lot of recruiters are people pleasers. So I'll sign up for that. It's a wonderful and a terrible personality for a recruiter, because you'll get sucked in and you'll get burned out, and setting boundaries is not easy. So have you had that experience? They join you and then they realize, nope, can't deal with this. I got to go back to the way I always did it.
They fight. There's a struggle. It's kind of like a dichotomy of personality of the old versus the new. And so there are times, though, in the one-on-one where you can just be kind of honest with them and say, hey, we kind of missed the sprint. What happened here? And usually I'll let them talk and I go, okay, so back to my original question, what happened here? And they're like, I went back to the old way. I said, okay, so let's look at the last sprint where you were locked in. Your clients were happy because you hit 68 or 80% of your sprint. This sprint you hit 30 or 40. And then too, the other thing, that the human aspect of it, Erin, is that, I was able to kind of talk to them and say, how do you feel this sprint mentally, physically, emotionally versus last sprint? Last sprint you felt amazing and you had all of this energy, and I hear someone deflated on the call. And to be able to make that connection, not just a performance thing, but an overall health thing of going, hey, this is a more efficient way of doing it, and you're going to be happier as a result. Just let's get back to that
Right.
behavior. There have been a couple, I wouldn't say recruiters, that have kind of joined, in working with me and said, hey, this is not for me, and they decide to bounce out. I have had organizations that go, hey, we're going to try this, and I give them a consult, and they go, well, we kind of changed it. We kind of made it this, I'm trying to think of a way without divulging, but they kind of went back to their own way, but just used points. I said, so essentially all you're doing is measuring the crazy and the chaos. That's not sprint. Congratulations. Hey, let me know how that works for you.
And not to get too far into the weeds, but is there sort of a number you have in mind as to the stopping point for when you're conducting a sprint? How many profiles is enough to be able to put in front of the hiring manager?
So our WIP limits, when we were testing, we started out with just 3. So once you had 3 sitting with the hiring manager, scheduled interviews, and maybe 3 and submitted, you stopped working on that job, you went and worked on the next one. And it was great because we started seeing things move quickly, but then we were scheduling and rescheduling and scheduling interviews. So by trying to be efficient, we created more inefficiency. So then we went all the way to the right and went to 10. And that was great, but we weren't hitting our WIP limits quick enough. And so it was affecting efficiency of production, not efficiency of time. 5 is just kind of a nice, good, even number. All right. And don't think that you have to find the 5. All right. So types of jobs that I work on, if I get 2 or 3, that's a WIP limit for me because they're very niche, senior level talent, right? But in the high volume world, getting that 5 and then having 5 sitting and waiting, that's 10 candidates for the manager to interview and or review. That's plenty for them to say grace on. And while they're doing all of that, you can go and make progress on some of these other ones that are defined as much needed for the client.
Okay. All right. Let me take it to the next level then with regard to the interview process. That's always been my favorite thing to disrupt because I cannot stand the serial approach to interviewing where you have candidates coming back and, well, getting on the Zoom over and over and over again these days. So what part of Agile will address that in your experience?
Oh, gosh, I think the intensity of the client saying that something is important. So now it has become an obsession for the recruiter. Without having that, a lot of times it's, okay, well, we want to put them through this interview and then they want to do it again. And the recruiter's so busy, they don't have time to kind of zero in and go, why are we interviewing this person 10 times? Now they have that intensity and that focus because they want to move that job from, assigned points to done. And that way they can kind of, count their scoreboard. So it comes back to that drumbeat of pausing and saying, okay, this is not working. And also looking at the metrics of a sprint and saying, okay, why do we have to go through 10 interviews? Look at what we did only doing 2 interviews on the last sprint versus this one. You guys are blocking the process. And that's where the accountability on the client comes in. Okay. The other thing is something that we found that was kind of surprising is that one of our recruiters at the bank began just a best practice after we would have our sprint allocation and retroactive meeting with our client. They would email all the managers who had points assigned to their role and said, hey, we are establishing that partnership. We're in the spotlight. You've been assigned points. Here's what I'm going to need. Here's kind of the timeline. So if I start working on this today, maybe by Thursday, can you block off certain times for me to go ahead and schedule interviews for you?
Nice.
And she began seeing this like just
thinking
camaraderie.
Ahead.
Yeah. And it was amazing because there was a couple of times where like managers would just email me out of the blue and go, hey, it was not her fault that we didn't hit the sprint. It was because I was out on vacation. I was like, okay, great. I mean, why is this coming to me? And then I read down, and it's because she established that locking arms with them.
Nice.
And I think that some of these iterations and the parlay, the extra growth and ideas that come out of recruiters when they actually have time to stop and go, how do I maximize my client experience? You know?
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing that drives actually backwards is accountability. What I've seen when we have pre-scheduled interview days, ideally decision days, a day when you've got all the right interviewers lined up, the candidate can come in, talk to everybody, we can have them walk out the door with an offer, or at the least tomorrow morning, we call them with an offer and we can make a decision quickly. But if we have that pre-scheduled interview day, then the recruiter's on the hook to create the candidates 4, 5, or 10 days earlier, and then generate the candidate flow, a couple days before that. So it becomes this kind of confined process because we're marching toward a very specific date, and it's not open-ended.
No.
Right? Have you found that has worked too, especially
It
the
does.
interview days where you're stacking up interviews all in one day?
It does. It helps. The only issue that sometimes that you run into is if you're dealing with an area that's incredibly short-staffed, like getting them to block off 4 hours of the day to do nothing but interviews is incredibly tough. So sometimes you have to be a little flexible.
Right.
The other thing that's, excuse me, really interesting is I always call it my executive order or Project ICE, and ICE stands for I've called and cared enough. So what happens is, let's say you're my hiring manager, and I've sent you candidates, you've interviewed them, I have no feedback. Well, in that feedback loop, it's 48 hours. So the hiring manager has 48 hours to give the recruiter feedback, so that way we have 48 hours to give our candidate feedback. And it's just an experience level, but it's also to keep things moving and moving quickly, right?
Yeah.
So let's say, the hiring manager goes AWOL, doesn't respond after 48 hours. The recruiter then engages their manager, who gets with, that next level manager and says, hey, we haven't gotten any feedback. Can you give us some help? They have 24 hours. If they don't respond, I email that division leader and say, I am enacting executive order ICE. We have called, we have instant message, your manager is going AWOL, so I am removing the points and the focus from this job until the next sprint. Let me know if you have any questions. And I copy the division leader and then that hiring manager. It's really kind of funny. Our CEO at the time asked for an ICE report. She wanted to see how many jobs are on there. And she started making calls to these division leaders going, what's going on here? They have candidates. The least you can do is give them feedback.
Nice. Speaking of branding, the earlier panel discussion was about branding. You can do branding internally of your recruitment process too. It sounds like you've been successful at that. I love the ICE report. I might steal that. Okay, good. This is super helpful. You talk in the book about the understanding the why. Yeah. Can you say more about that? What do you mean by understanding the why, and why that's so important for recruiters?
For me to understand a position, I need to understand, to be able to make that connection between what that role does and the profit level that it ultimately hits. Okay. Whenever I first joined, again, new industry, I didn't really know what any of these things were. There was like a rock crusher role. It's like, what's the big deal? It's a rock crusher. It wasn't until I went into the lab and got a tour by the lab manager, and I warned him ahead of time. I said, I'm going to ask you 1,000 questions. Just please answer them. It helps me understand the process. Well, whenever I walked out of the lab, I understood that very first job, the rock crusher, is the top of the funnel. And that sample that moves through, and as we test it, inspect it, or certify, or whatever we're asked to do by our client, as it moves through the process, it collects money. And so that the more that we have crushing that rock, the more samples we can get in, it's going to increase the output. To me, it's like that's basic economics. So understanding, how that role fits in the whole grand scheme of things, from the entry level all the way to the senior executive, and what makes that role successful. That's going to help you be able to develop that persona. And two, it's a good way to get an agreement from the manager and make sure that you kind of stick it to them, whenever they want to kind of move things around and say, oh, no, I think I kind of want someone that's, more like A, B, and C, whenever they actually outlined X, Y, and Z, and bring them back to that point. It's the credibility. It's that hiring partnership. And I think one thing that, we've kind of talked about how we're people pleasers. I think one thing that recruiters need to understand is that you get more respect having a diplomatic backbone than you do being a pushover. And being able to be consultative and push back and ask questions and go, okay, well, do you really need that kind of role? It sounds more like you need this. And so let's regrade it. Let's relook at our search.
Yeah.
They're going to value your insight a lot more. And so whenever you want to try something weird and crazy like I do all the time, they're going to listen. They're going to say, let's at least give it a shot, because they know that you're going to put parameters in there because you understand the why.
Right. Yeah. Understanding the why, asking a ton of questions,
Mhm.
exercising that intellectual curiosity, and then paying attention. It sounds like you pay attention a lot when you're asking those questions. You're just really trying to get your head around. Talk about the story you told me earlier about the role that you had that took people who could take a lot of heat, literally.
Oh yeah. So we have so you have the rock crusher, and then you have the fire assay, ASSAY. And they are responsible for melting that product down into a way that it can be hammered out and kind of examined through. That is the extent of what I know about it. All I know is that they get to play with fire, and it's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very hot, and they have to wear all of this, of course, protective material. And oh, by the way, this is in Reno, so add heat on top of heat on top of heat. Not the most sexy job out there in the world. And so, we started seeing some issues with some of the candidates that we were getting in saying, oh yeah, that sounds like a great job. And then they see what it does and they're like, I'm out, I'm not interested. So we wanted to find a new candidate pool, and wild, crazy idea, somebody on the team said, well, firefighters deal with fire all the time. It's like, what if we went after volunteer firefighters? What if we maybe went after retired firefighters that just want to kind of get back in the business? They're already used to the heat. They're already used to the suits. Let's try it. We tried it. The volunteer aspect of it, the craziness in the schedule. Just a quick update for you since we last talked. It's not the best, but the client was at least willing to explore it.
Okay.
And that's the part of going in and kind of being different and creative. But it's because of that recruiter's ability to perform on the sprint and also be consultative. I mean, there are times on our sprint call where she's on there with the division head, and he goes, I'm going to give this many points to this lab and this many to this one. And she's like, why? That one's not built out. You don't have the measuring equipment here. I think you should move it over here. And
Nice.
She always sends a text like after, she's like, hey, I'm sorry. I was like, why? That's what he wants. I love the fact that you were so connected with the client that you can give them advice and say, I think let's cool it on this particular lab for this sprint until they get everything built out, and let's redivert over here. That's consultation.
Outstanding. The other thing I love about that story is that the mindset shift in part was about maybe we can change it to a part-time role instead of a full-time role, because number one, it's tough to do that kind of a job full-time. And then number two, there are those firefighters that maybe, they work for 6 days on, 8 days off, or whatever their schedule is. They've got a block of time potentially where they could just come in and do the work part-time, make extra money. It's good for them. It's good for you. But I just love the kind of, it's almost a talent management lens that you're taking to help you solve sourcing problems.
Yes.
So super cool. And, again, as RPO provides these unique roles, helping clients with some really unique challenges, I just want to encourage us all as talent acquisition professionals to just, think broadly, be innovative, think about a new and better way, as many RPO providers are already, but I think we need a little more good publicity as it relates to, some of those creative solutions that are being presented to clients and partnered with clients. You talk in the book about measure what counts.
Yes.
And I know already that time to fill is not your favorite thing to measure.
I hate it.
What is your favorite thing to measure?
I am obsessed with quick quits. So I look at the number of 90, 180, and then 1 year, of course, because one of the things that we'll go back to time to fill. One of the companies that asked me to do some consulting, they were so excited. They implemented kind of their version of Sprint, and they said, we reduced our time to fill by 10 days. I said, oh, that's fantastic. How'd you do it? And they went through some. It was some really cool ideas. And I said, so what's your quick quit ratio? The what? I said, what's your turnover in that kind of that 90, 180, and 1 year? And they came back and they said, we analyzed it in our 90 days at 42%. I said, for that division that you cut 10 days off of the time to fill? And they're like, yeah. I said, so you want to go to your client and say, I reduce your time to fill by 10 days, which means that I am finding the wrong person 42% of the time, 10 days quicker. I said, that's why I don't like the metric. I'm obsessed with understanding, are we finding the right people? Are they there? I'm obsessed with client scores. So we have a hiring manager score that goes out that has an NPS attached to it. We have a candidate NPS as well that I'm absolutely obsessed with. So 60% of how I look at a recruiter is their candidate experience score, their hiring manager experience score, their average percentage of sprint, because that's how our client defines success. And then the last one is the quick quits. And then, of course, diversity is intertwined all through that, So those are kind of the 5 metrics that I am, you can ask my team. I measure everything about it. I test things. I want to know if we tweak this a little bit, does it help or does it hurt? And to me, those are the ones that are the most impactful to the business. Again, tying it to the profit line. If I'm making my manager happy with the right candidate, they're going to be more productive. The team's going to be more productive. If the candidate comes in, they're happy with the process, they're going to stay longer, which means I don't have to fill that job every 90 days. And then if I'm looking at my quick quits and I can reduce that, that is an unreal cost save to our bottom line. And then, of course, diversity of thought is going to get us better products, better services, better delivery, and we're going to be able to connect better with clients. Again, profit.
Absolutely. And that is a decent segue to the retention part of your job, which I mentioned earlier that I would come back to. So the quick quits and or all the other retention in the organization is something you're looking after. Is that right?
Yes, all of it. So whenever I first joined and we have monthly management review MMRs, and I presented turnover in addition to TA. And it was just kind of blew everybody's mind. I said, but to me, these two are completely connected. I need to know how many people are leaving so that way I know how to get my team staffed and ready. But then we also need to dig into the why. And, we started seeing some increase in certain areas and certain groups. And so, we actually looked at the survey data, the exit survey data. And we determined that there was something missing, that for me, data never gives me answers. It always gives me more questions. And I'm just, I've always been called the Riddler ever since Catholic school in 2nd grade, because I always ask why, why are things trending this way? So we started understanding that there was 2 things that were missing. One, we were looking at kind of the tenure of stay, so not just the quick quits, but then there was also something that at like the 3 or 4 year mark, what happens there, because the turnover increases. But then on the flip side of that, I wanted to look at what the qualitative information was. So the people that are leaving in 1 year, why is it? Everybody thought, oh, this is compensation. It wasn't compensation. It was work culture. That's something that can be fixed, So to me, it's fascinating. It's daunting, especially in this environment. But the retention aspect of it, to me, is so tied to TA, because if I understand why people are leaving, it helps me sell the job better, and it makes me refine the kind of candidate that I need to find.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are almost out of time, and I really just wanted to throw in here a shameless plug. If you liked our discussion today, actually, Trent and I recorded a podcast discussion. I have a podcast called Big Fish in the Talent Pool, and it's on pretty much any of the platforms that you listen to podcasts on. And if you enjoyed this, you're going to hear a whole lot more. And some of Trent's very entertaining stories, in addition to the ones you heard today. So I hope that's interesting for all of you. And in Big Fish in the Talent Pool, I actually interview heads of talent acquisition and heads of RPOs and all the things that we all struggle with on a daily basis if we're in leadership. Or also, interestingly, coming up on an episode is going to be some aspiring talent acquisition leaders, because that actually is my mission. I want to encourage current professionals who think they want to be leaders, but they don't have any idea of what that really looks like. So it's pretty exciting to me to be able to kind of hopefully help the next generation of talent acquisition leaders, because what we do is not for the faint of heart. That's for sure. So.
And the last little bit of advice that I have, Erin,
Please.
is remember that whenever you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So choose wisely.
Oh, Oh, the economy of decisions. Love it.
Prioritization.
Okay. You say yes, you're saying no.
Right.
Fantastic. Terrific reminder. Trent, thank you so much for all
I
your
enjoyed
wisdom.
it.
Thank you for making the time to write the book, which helps us all with this very important thing we call recruitment and talent acquisition. And good luck with everything.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, hopefully.
Okay.